The mist hung thick over the forest, curling around ancient oaks and silvered ferns, casting the world in a dreamlike half-light. Lyra moved quietly among the shadows, her bare feet brushing against the soft moss. The cold did not bother her. She was used to walking alone, used to the quiet ache of rejection that had followed her like a shadow for months. She remembered the day the beta had cast her aside. His eyes had been sharp, proud, and cruelly amused, as though her devotion had been nothing more than a joke to him. For weeks after, she had wandered the forests near his castle, wrestling with the sting of humiliation and the ache of a heart left wanting. Yet in her solitude, she had learned to draw strength from the wind, the trees, and the pulse of the wild that thrummed beneath her skin. That morning, a messenger had arrived. A gilded envelope heavy with wax bore the beta's seal. Lyra hesitated before opening it. The words inside were sharp, mocking, an invitation to the beta's grand mating ceremony. A cruel display meant to remind her of her rejection, to flaunt his new mate and twist the knife further into her heart. Her first impulse was anger, then despair, but then surprisingly there was something else, a spark of defiance. She would go, not to beg, not to weep, but to show that she was not broken, not weak, and not afraid of him. The beta's castle rose on the edge of a cliff, dark and imposing, overlooking the valley below. Its towers twisted toward the sky like blackened thorns, and the walls were etched with centuries of history, of battles fought and alliances forged in blood and shadow. Lyra approached under the cover of the mist, her cloak drawn tight around her shoulders. Every step toward the castle felt like stepping into a storm, yet her heart beat with quiet determination. Inside, the beta moved through his court like a king born to command. His new mate, flawless and radiant, followed close behind, a symbol of his victory. The courtiers whispered and bowed, some out of respect, others out of fear, all keenly aware of the spectacle they were about to witness. The grand hall was draped in dark velvet, with candles flickering against walls adorned with the history of his pack. Music, delicate and haunting, wound through the air, adding an eerie beauty to the gathering. The beta had not expected Lyra. He could not have imagined that she would accept his invitation, or that she would arrive with her own power hidden in plain sight. His smile faltered for the briefest moment as the doors of the hall swung open. A hush fell over the crowd. Lyra stepped in, her presence commanding in its quiet way. She was no longer the fragile girl he had once dismissed. Her eyes, dark and luminous, met his with calm strength. She was flanked not by guards nor by magic of her own making, but by the Alpha. The Alpha. A figure of legend, dark and imposing, with eyes that seemed to see into the heart of every soul in the room. His presence shifted the energy of the hall immediately, like a shadow moving over the sun. The beta's pride wavered. The court felt it too. Here was a force they had rarely seen, a power not granted by title or wealth, but by mastery, respect, and something older, deeper, and untamed. The beta cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "Lyra," he said, his voice smooth but edged with unease. "How kind of you to accept my invitation. Surely you could not resist witnessing my happiness." His tone was meant to wound, to remind her and everyone else of her place in his world. Lyra's gaze did not falter. "I came," she said softly, "to see truth, not lies." A murmur ran through the hall. Courtiers shifted uneasily, sensing that the balance of power had shifted with a single step. Lyra's calm confidence was a quiet storm, and even the beta could not ignore it. The Alpha's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a protective presence that radiated strength. He said nothing, yet his silence spoke volumes. There was no need for words. His mere presence was a declaration that Lyra was not alone, that she was valued, and that her strength was undeniable. The beta's new mate looked at Lyra with a mix of curiosity and unease, sensing the tension that rippled through the room. For the first time, she understood that Lyra was not just another victim of rejection. Lyra was a force, calm, poised, and resolute. The beta laughed lightly, attempting to mask his discomfort. "Well then," he said, lifting a goblet, "let us toast to alliances, to power, and to the bonds that fate so kindly allows us to choose." His smile was sharp, and he glanced at Lyra, a predator testing a rival. Lyra's lips curved in a faint, controlled smile. She did not raise a glass, did not bow, and did not falter. Her eyes held his, steady and unwavering, and the weight of her gaze was like a quiet warning. She would not be toyed with. She would not be humiliated further. The music swelled, and the beta's court looked on, unsure what to do. The air was thick with expectation, with fear, with curiosity. Lyra and the alpha moved together with purpose, their steps measured, their presence a subtle defiance against the beta's carefully constructed world. At one point, a courtier dared to whisper, "She has come with the alpha. Does this not change everything?" Indeed it did. Everything had changed. The beta's plans, his sense of dominance, his pride, all were challenged by this quiet intrusion. Lyra's decision to arrive had not been a mere act of defiance. It was a statement. She had claimed her power simply by standing there, and by refusing to be afraid. The beta's mask of composure cracked ever so slightly, revealing a flash of uncertainty, perhaps even fear. He had underestimated her. He had believed rejection would make her fragile, dependent, and submissive, but she had grown stronger in the shadow of his cruelty. Lyra's thoughts wandered briefly to the moments she had spent alone in the forest. All those days of silence, of listening to the wind and learning patience, had led to this. She realized that true strength was not measured by power or by victory in a duel, but by the courage to face those who had hurt you, unbroken and unafraid. As she moved closer to the center of the hall, she felt the alpha's eyes on her. There was no judgment there, no condescension, only acknowledgement, respect, and a silent promise that he would not let her stand alone against the beta. That promise alone steadied her heart. The beta tried to regain the moment, speaking with a charm that was meant to dazzle and dominate. "Lyra," he said, voice low and silky, "surely you understand the nature of choice. You could have chosen to remain in peace hidden in the shadows, but you chose this path instead, and now you stand before all, challenging what you know you cannot change." Lyra tilted her head, her voice calm, almost melodic in the hush of the hall. "Perhaps," she said, "it is not about what I cannot change, but about what I refuse to allow to define me." The hall was silent for a heartbeat, and in that silence, 1,000 unspoken truths were laid bare. The beta's pride, once unshakable, trembled. The courtier's whispers became a low hum of tension, and Lyra, standing with the alpha by her side, felt a power within her that was as natural and unstoppable as the wind through the trees. The beta's eyes narrowed, a storm of frustration and disbelief brewing within. He had invited her to mock her, to show the court her inferiority, but she had turned the tables with quiet strength, with courage, and with the presence of the alpha. He had not anticipated this. The ceremony, which had been meant to be a display of triumph and dominance, had shifted. What was intended as a spectacle of cruelty had become a testament to something far greater. The undeniable force of choice, courage and destiny intertwined, and then, as the candles flickered and shadows danced across the walls, the beta realized fully that the night had changed. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The alpha's presence, silent yet commanding, and Lyra's quiet defiance were now the center of all attention. The beta's lips twisted into a strained smile, but it could not hide the storm behind his eyes. He had been challenged, humiliated, and now forced to reckon with a truth he had never expected. Lyra was no longer the girl he could scorn. She was a force he could not control, and perhaps a force he could not conquer. And as Lyra stood there, her gaze unwavering, the faintest curve of a smile playing on her lips, the first echo of the future stirred in the shadows. One thing was certain: the night was far from over, and the choices made here would ripple through the forest, the castle, and the hearts of all who watched. Lyra had arrived, unbroken, and with the alpha at her side. The beta had invited her to mock her, but she had come with power, with courage, and with the promise of change. Cliffhanger. Across the hall, the beta's eyes flicked to the alpha. Pride, fear, and anger warred within him. A duel would come, he knew, one that could decide not just power but the very fate of those who stood in this hall. And when dawn broke, nothing would ever be the same. The night hung heavy over the castle, and the moonlight spilled through the high windows, casting silver patterns across the cold stone floors. Lyra stood at the edge of the grand hall, the alpha beside her, their presence a quiet defiance against the beta's arrogance. The court remained tense, Every whisper carried like wind through the shadows, every gaze weighing upon them. The beta could feel the shift in the air. His plans, once so perfectly crafted, now teetered like a candle in the wind. He had invited Lyra to humiliate her, to assert dominance, yet all he had achieved was to expose his own fragility. Pride warred with fury inside him, and his lips twisted into a mask of control. "You should not have come," he said finally, his voice low, smooth, and edged with anger. "This is my court, my ceremony. You are not meant to be part of this." Lyra lifted her chin, the light of the moon reflecting in her dark eyes. "I am part of this, because I will not be ignored. I will not be silenced, and I will not be your plaything," she said, her voice steady, calm, and unwavering. The Alpha's gaze never left her. He had watched her grow, even from afar, sensing her courage, her determination, and the quiet fire that refused to die. He did not speak, yet his presence alone lent her strength, a shield invisible yet unbreakable. The courtiers shifted uneasily. Some had never seen such audacity, particularly in one the beta had scorned. Others whispered of the Alpha, of his legendary strength, of the quiet way he commanded respect without raising his voice. It was clear to all that the balance of power had shifted, and the beta's dominance was no longer absolute. The beta's new mate, radiant and poised, cast uncertain glances at Lyra. She had not expected to face competition like this, nor the quiet magnetism of a connection that even the Alpha seemed to share with Lyra. Unease flickered across her face, and she realized that the dynamic had changed. The night had become a test not only of pride but of heart, courage, and will. The beta forced a smile, raising a goblet in a practiced gesture. "Then let us toast," he said smoothly, "to the bonds that define us, to the power we wield, and to the choices we make." His eyes lingered on Lyra, sharp and calculating as though he sought to intimidate her through sheer presence. Lyra did not raise a glass. She did not bow. Instead, she let her gaze meet his, steady and unwavering. In that look, there was no fear, no hesitation, only clarity and quiet power. The murmur of the court grew, a low hum of tension and curiosity. Everyone sensed it. She had changed, and so had the rules of the game. "Your arrogance blinds you," Lyra said quietly, so that only the beta and the Alpha could hear. "You believe this ceremony proves your strength, but it only shows your weakness. Pride without understanding is fragile." The beta's eyes flashed, a mixture of fury and disbelief. No one had ever spoken to him like that in his court. He had commanded loyalty, respect, even fear. But Lyra's words, quiet yet unwavering, cut through the pretense and pierced the air like a sword. The Alpha stepped slightly forward, his voice deep and calm, carrying through the hall. "Strength is measured not by the fear you inspire, but by the courage you protect and the bonds you honor. This court has forgotten that lesson." The beta froze, his composure slipping. The Alpha's presence was a force beyond pride or wealth. It was something older, deeper, untamed. Every eye in the hall felt the pull of that presence, and for the first time, the beta realized that he was not in full control of the room. His victory, once so certain, now seemed fragile. A murmur passed through the court. Whispers of respect for the Alpha, curiosity about Lyra, and uncertainty about the beta's future rippled like wind through the stone corridors. The beta's mouth moved, forming words of challenge, yet they sounded hollow even to his own ears. Lyra's mind wandered briefly to the forest, to the days she had spent alone, learning patience, listening to the wind, and finding strength in her own heartbeat. She understood now that the power she carried did not come from force or intimidation, but from clarity, courage, and self-respect. She had walked many paths alone, and each step had led her here to this moment where she could claim her voice. The beta's mask of composure finally cracked, and a flash of anger burned in his eyes. He had miscalculated, underestimated her resilience, and now faced the humiliation of losing control. "You think your presence here changes anything?" he hissed. This is still my court, my ceremony, and my choice. You are nothing more than a shadow in my plans." Lyra's response was calm, yet filled with quiet fire. "Perhaps you see only shadows because you refuse to look at the light. I am not your possession, nor your joke, and your choices do not define me." The hall fell silent. Even the music, delicate and haunting, seemed to pause in reverence to the tension. Every heart in the room beat faster, every eye fixed on the three figures at the center: the beta, fierce with pride and rage; the alpha, calm and commanding; and Lyra, steady and unafraid, radiating a strength that no one had expected. The beta's pride could not accept this challenge. He needed to assert control, to reclaim the dominance he had lost in a single evening. His eyes flicked to the alpha, a storm of fury and calculation within them. "You will regret this," he said, voice low, dangerous. "I will not allow anyone to humiliate me. Not her, not you, and not this court." The alpha's gaze held steady, and for a moment the hall felt suspended in time. The energy was taut, like a bowstring pulled to its limit, waiting for the inevitable release. Lyra's heart beat steadily, matching the rhythm of the tension in the room. She knew what the beta meant. He would challenge them, and the consequences would be more than pride or insult. "Then let us see whose strength is true," the alpha said softly, his voice carrying the weight of command and promise. "Tomorrow at dawn we will settle this, not with words but with action, and the truth will be clear to all." A murmur of shock and anticipation ran through the court. A duel at dawn was no trivial matter. It was a test of skill, courage, and resolve. The stakes were higher than pride or dominance. It was about control, destiny, and respect. Everyone knew the beta would fight with everything he had, yet the alpha's presence made it clear that the outcome would not be simple. Lyra felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She knew she would not be a passive observer. This duel was not just about power. It was about reclaiming dignity, asserting choice, and facing the one who had sought to define her by rejection and cruelty. She would stand, not as a shadow of the past, but as a force of her own making. The beta's new mate, who had watched with uncertain eyes, now realized the depth of what she faced. Lyra was not a rival to fear. She was a presence to respect. Even the alpha, legendary as he was, drew strength from her courage and clarity. Together they formed a bond that even the beta could not anticipate, a unity that promised transformation and challenge. As the evening drew on, the court began to disperse, yet the tension lingered like mist in the corners of the grand hall. Courtiers whispered, cast curious glances, and speculated about what the dawn would bring. The beta retreated to his chambers, fury and calculation burning within him, while the alpha and Lyra walked through the shadowed corridors, their steps quiet but purposeful. "You were brave tonight," the alpha said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "More than I expected, even knowing you as I do." Lyra allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Bravery comes from necessity," she replied, "and I have learned that fear does not protect me, nor does silence. Tomorrow will not be easy, but I will not step back." The alpha nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her strength and resolve. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a subtle but grounding presence, and they paused at the edge of a high balcony overlooking the moonlit forest. The wind stirred, carrying with it the scents of pine, earth, and distant streams. Lyra felt the pulse of the wild, the heartbeat of life and destiny intertwined. The beta's words echoed in her mind, a reminder of the duel to come. He would fight with every ounce of strength and cunning he possessed. But for the first time in months, Lyra felt neither fear nor hesitation. She was ready, not just for him, but for herself, for the truth of her own heart, and for the choices she would make. The moon climbed higher, silver and unyielding, casting light on the castle and the forest beyond. Shadows twisted, whispered, and waited. The night was alive with promise, with tension, and with the inevitability of what was to come. Cliffhanger. As Lyra and the alpha gazed at the forest below, The beta stood in his tower, eyes dark with fury and obsession. He was plotting, scheming, and readying himself for a confrontation that could change everything. And when the first rays of dawn touched the forest, the duel would begin, and nothing would remain the same. Dawn broke over the horizon like a slow flame, spilling pale gold across the misted forest and the jagged cliffs where the castle stood. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, the soft dew soaking the tips of her boots, her breath steady and even despite the tension that gripped her chest. The beta waited across from her, his stance rigid, pride etched into every line of his body. Between them, the forest held its breath, silent and watching, as if the trees themselves were witnesses to the storm about to unfold. The alpha stepped beside Lyra, his presence calm and unwavering. He did not need words. His quiet confidence gave her strength. The bond between them, subtle yet undeniable, hummed like a thread pulled taut, ready to guide them through the chaos that was about to erupt. Lyra's fingers brushed the hilt of her blade, not in anger but in readiness. She would not be passive. She would face this moment with courage, clarity, and choice. The beta's eyes gleamed with fury, masked only slightly by the practiced calm of a predator preparing to strike. "This ends today," he said, voice low and steady but laced with venom. "One way or another, the outcome will prove what is mine." Lyra met his gaze without flinching. "Nothing that is forced is ever truly yours," she replied. "Control taken through fear and cruelty is fragile, and I am no one's possession." A hush fell over the forest clearing. Birds paused their songs, leaves seemed to still, and even the morning wind held its breath. The duel would not be a simple test of strength. It would be a clash of pride, courage, and spirit. It would reveal truths that words alone could never convey. The beta lunged first, swift and precise, every movement calculated to overwhelm. Lyra stepped back, barely avoiding the first strike. Her own movements were measured, flowing with the rhythm she had learned in countless hours alone in the forest, running through the trees, listening to the wind, and trusting her instincts. Each step was deliberate, each breath controlled. She was ready, not just for him, but for the truth of herself. The alpha circled to her other side, a silent guardian, but never intrusive. His eyes never left the beta, calculating, protective, yet patient. The beta had underestimated both of them. He believed this was a duel for domination over Lyra, yet it had already become a test of character, of inner strength, and of the bonds that could not be broken by arrogance or pride. The beta's strikes were fierce, but Lyra moved with a calm that belied her quick heart. She dodged, blocked, and countered with precise movements that kept him off balance. The alpha occasionally intervened, not to fight for her, but to guide, to create openings, and to remind the beta that neither of them was alone. The duel was a dance, violent yet controlled, a storm contained within the forest clearing. Lyra's mind remained sharp, her senses heightened. She recalled the nights in the misty woods, the quiet lessons of patience and observation. Each movement of the beta, each shift in his stance spoke to her. She had been rejected, humiliated, and yet here she stood not as a victim but as a force, measured and unyielding. The beta's frustration grew. He had always relied on fear, manipulation, and status to assert dominance. But against Lyra, and with the alpha's silent strength beside her, those tools were meaningless. He struck again, a flurry meant to end the duel quickly. But Lyra anticipated, sidestepped, and countered, her own actions guided by clarity rather than anger. "You are stronger than I expected," the beta hissed, his voice a mixture of awe and rage. "But do not think it will be enough. I will not lose to anyone, especially not to her." Lyra's response was steady, firm, and unwavering. "It is not strength alone that defines victory," she said. "It is courage, choice, and the will to stand unbroken." The duel continued, a tense ballet of shadow and light. Leaves swirled around their feet, kicked up by the force of movement. The forest seemed alive, responding to the clash of wills. Birds took flight, startled by the sudden storm of motion, while distant cliffs echoed with the sound of challenge and resistance. The alpha moved closer, anticipating a strike that the beta had not planned. With a subtle step and a shift of weight, he intercepted, giving Lyra the opening she needed. She did not strike to harm, but to assert control, to show that she would not be intimidated, that she could act decisively when the moment required it. The beta stumbled slightly, frustration cracking through his pride. He had expected to dominate through skill and fear, yet the duel was no longer about him alone. It had become a test of character, of loyalty, and of the bonds that tied Lyra and the Alpha together. The Alpha spoke softly, more to Lyra than to the beta. "Trust yourself. You are stronger than he believes and stronger than you know." Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle within her. She had always felt alone in the world, always pushed aside, always underestimated. But now she understood the truth. Strength came not from others' approval, not from power taken by force, but from the courage to face fear and act with clarity. The beta, sensing the momentum slipping, became more reckless. His attacks were faster, sharper, and more aggressive, yet they lacked the precision that had once made him so dangerous. Each strike he made was countered by Lyra's focus, guided by instinct and clarity rather than raw strength. A sudden movement, a feint, a shift, a calculated step, brought Lyra close to the beta. She did not strike to harm him, yet her presence, her calm and steady confidence unsettled him. He realized for the first time that he was facing not a victim of rejection, but a partner in power, someone whose courage could not be broken. The Alpha intervened once more, not with force, but with strategy. He guided Lyra's movement with subtle gestures, creating openings and redirecting the beta's energy. It was a silent partnership, a bond forged not in words but in understanding. The duel was no longer a simple fight. It was a demonstration of trust, respect, and mutual strength. Lyra took a deep breath, centering herself. She had been afraid once, uncertain and vulnerable, but now she was focused. Every step, every movement, every glance was deliberate. She was not fighting for revenge. She was standing for herself, for choice, and for the recognition that her courage could not be diminished. The beta made a final, desperate strike, aimed to overwhelm, but Lyra anticipated it, sidestepped, and let the momentum carry him forward, unbalancing him. The Alpha moved with her, blocking his retreat, guiding the energy without forcing it. In that single moment, the duel reached its peak, a clash not of brute strength but of wills, clarity, and unspoken understanding. The beta froze, realizing that his plan had failed. He had underestimated her, underestimated the bond she shared with the Alpha, and underestimated the courage that burned quietly within her. Pride and rage warred within him, but there was no path forward that did not end in humiliation or loss. Lyra stepped forward, her gaze steady, her voice calm. "This ends now," she said. "I am no one's shadow. I am not yours to control, and I will not be defined by cruelty or fear." The forest seemed to hold its breath as the beta fell to his knees, not in surrender to force, but in the recognition of truth. His pride, once unshakable, had been tempered by courage, clarity, and the quiet strength of someone he had dismissed. The Alpha stepped beside Lyra, silent yet commanding. He did not speak, yet his presence reinforced the message. The duel had ended not with hatred but with acknowledgement. Lyra had faced fear, defiance, and cruelty, and she had emerged unbroken. The beta's lips twitched in anger, but he said nothing. His defeat was not complete destruction, yet it was undeniable. He had been challenged, exposed, and humbled in a way he had never anticipated. Lyra felt a quiet victory settle within her. She had not only stood against the beta, but she had discovered a strength within herself that she had never fully known. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Choice was more powerful than cruelty, and the bonds of trust and respect were far stronger than arrogance or pride. As the sun climbed higher, spilling light across the misted forest, Lyra and the Alpha stood together, the clearing around them silent and still. The duel had ended, but the consequences would ripple through the castle, the court, and the hearts of all who had witnessed it. Cliffhanger. From the edge of the forest, shadows stirred. The beta would not accept defeat so easily. Darkness lingered, secrets waited, and new challenges were already gathering on the horizon. Lyra and the Alpha knew the duel had tested strength and courage, but the true trials of destiny, power, and choice had only just begun. The sun had climbed higher over the castle, casting golden light on the stone walls, yet the forest below remained veiled in mist. Lyra and the Alpha walked through the winding paths of the ancient woods, leaving the echo of the duel behind them. The forest was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a bird. But even in this quiet, the weight of the morning's events lingered. Lyra's heart still raced from the confrontation with the beta. It had not been easy to face him, to stand against his pride and cruelty, yet the victory had not felt like triumph. It had felt like awakening, a recognition of strength she had always carried but had never fully trusted. She had faced fear, humiliation, and rejection, and had emerged unbroken, her spirit sharper and more determined than ever. The Alpha moved beside her, silent and steady. His presence was not just protective but grounding. He had not dominated the duel. He had guided her, allowed her to claim her own strength and ensured that her courage could shine. Lyra looked at him, her gratitude and curiosity intertwining. He was a mystery, a legend in his own right. Yet he treated her as an equal, never as someone to save, never as someone to control. "You handled yourself well," the Alpha said finally, his voice low, carrying the weight of respect. "More than well. You stood, not just with courage, but with clarity. That is rare." Lyra glanced at him, a faint smile brushing her lips. "I could not have done it without knowing you were beside me. Not to fight for me, but to stand with me." The Alpha nodded, a faint smile of acknowledgement crossing his features. "Strength is best measured not by what you take, but by what you choose to protect. And you have chosen well." They continued walking through the forest, the path winding past towering trees and glimmering streams. Lyra's mind wandered, recalling the months she had spent alone, surviving on her own, learning patience and self-reliance. She realized that the duel had been more than a test of skill. It had been a mirror, reflecting the strength she had cultivated all along. And now that strength was no longer hidden. It was visible, undeniable, and respected. The Alpha paused at a clearing where the sunlight fell in golden shafts through the branches. "We need to consider what comes next," he said. "The beta is not finished. His pride has been wounded, and pride like his will not rest easily." Lyra's gaze hardened. She knew the truth in his words. The beta would not simply retreat into shame. He would seek to reclaim what he believed was his, and that meant the threat would linger. Yet Lyra felt no fear. The duel had proven to her that she could face challenge and danger and emerge whole. She had been rejected, humiliated, and scorned, but now she understood her own power and she would not allow it to be overshadowed. "We face him together," she said, her voice firm. "Not out of reliance, but out of choice. If he challenges us, we are ready, and we will meet him as equals, not as adversaries to fear." The Alpha studied her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded, a faint trace of admiration in his eyes. "You speak with wisdom beyond your years," he said. "And I agree. Whatever comes, we face it together." The two of them walked deeper into the woods, the forest growing darker and older as they went. Ancient trees twisted toward the sky, their roots tangled like the threads of destiny. The Alpha led her to a secluded glade, a place few had ever seen. Here, the air was thick with the scent of pine and moss, and the light filtered through the branches in gentle patterns, creating an atmosphere of quiet magic. Lyra paused, taking in the serenity. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It feels timeless, as if the forest itself has been waiting for this moment." The Alpha's gaze softened. "It has. Places like this endure because they hold the memory of courage, of choice, and of strength. You have shown all three today." They settled near the center of the glade, the soft grass beneath them, the quiet hum of nature surrounding them. Lyra allowed herself a moment of reflection, thinking of the duel, the court, and the beta's wounded pride. She realized that the confrontation had not only tested her courage, but had also begun to untangle the weight of fear and self-doubt she had carried for so long. "You have changed," the Alpha said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "Not because of the duel, but because of what you allowed yourself to see. You have always been strong, Lyra. You have only needed to trust it." Lyra nodded, a quiet warmth spreading through her chest. "I think I understand now. Strength is not about dominating others or forcing respect. It is about knowing yourself, standing for what you believe in, and not letting fear dictate your choices." The Alpha's expression was unreadable for a moment, then he gave a subtle nod of agreement. "And that understanding will serve you well, not just with the beta, but with whatever challenges the world places before you. Courage and clarity are rare. Few possess both." Lyra allowed herself a faint smile. Then I will not waste them. Whatever comes, I will meet it as myself, not as someone defined by rejection or fear. The Alpha remained silent, watching her with quiet admiration. His respect was not the kind that demanded loyalty or gratitude. It was the kind that acknowledged courage, choice, and integrity. Lyra felt a connection with him that was deeper than fear, desire, or obligation. It was a bond forged in trust, respect, and the recognition of strength in another. The sun climbed higher, and the shadows in the glade shifted, painting the ground with dancing patterns of light. Lyra and the Alpha remained in the quiet, knowing that the forest was their sanctuary, even if only for a moment. But beyond the trees, beyond the mist, the Beta was not idle. His pride had been wounded, and he would seek allies, schemes, and strategies to regain what he had lost. Lyra's thoughts returned to the castle, to the Beta's court, and to the consequences of the duel. She knew that the next encounter would be more than physical. It would test strategy, patience, and the limits of courage. Yet she felt no fear. She had discovered a power that came not from dominance or intimidation, but from choice, clarity, and unwavering resolve. "We should be ready," the Alpha said finally, breaking the silence. "The Beta will not accept defeat quietly. He will seek to challenge us in ways we cannot yet predict. We must remain vigilant." Lyra's gaze hardened. "We are ready, not because we are fearless, but because we have each other, and because we will not allow cruelty or arrogance to define us." The Alpha gave a faint nod, the corners of his lips curving in a subtle expression of approval. "Then let us prepare, not just for what comes, but for what we choose to become. Courage and choice will guide us, and we will meet whatever challenges the future holds without hesitation." The forest seemed to respond to their resolve. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine, earth, and distant streams. Shadows shifted, light danced, and the world felt alive with possibility and promise. Lyra realized that the duel had been only the beginning. The true challenges lay ahead, not just against the Beta, but against forces she had yet to understand, forces that would test courage, trust, and the depth of her own strength. For the first time in months, Lyra felt complete. She was no longer the rejected mate, no longer defined by the Beta's cruelty. She was herself, strong, clear, and unafraid. She had claimed her voice, her choice, and her courage, and she would not relinquish them. The Alpha placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Whatever comes, remember this," he said. "You are stronger than you know, and we are not alone in facing it." Lyra nodded, letting the words settle within her. She had learned the power of choice, the strength of courage, and the quiet force of standing unbroken. The forest, the duel, and the morning sun all bore witness to her awakening. Cliffhanger. From the edge of the forest, unseen eyes watched. The Beta's pride had been wounded, and he would not rest. Dark schemes were already forming. Alliances whispered in shadow, and a new threat waited just beyond the trees. Lyra and the Alpha had won the duel, but the true trials of destiny, power, and choice were only beginning, and the future would demand all the courage they possessed. The castle was quiet that evening, but the tension in the air was almost tangible. Word of the duel had spread quickly, carried on whispers and cautious glances. Courtiers moved silently through the halls, eyes flicking toward the throne room where the Beta had retreated in solitude. Pride and fury warred within him, and the knowledge of his defeat gnawed at his carefully constructed image. Lyra walked beside the Alpha, their steps in unison. They had returned from the forest glade, carrying the calm and quiet strength of their shared resolve. The duel had tested them, but it had also revealed truths. Courage and clarity mattered more than intimidation. Choice was more powerful than pride, and loyalty could not be commanded. It had to be earned. "You handled the duel with more grace than most would expect," the Alpha said, his voice calm but edged with admiration. "You did not seek revenge, only balance. That is rare." Lyra glanced at him, the faintest smile brushing her lips. "Balance is stronger than vengeance. Pride can destroy, but understanding and courage build. I have learned that today." The Alpha's eyes softened. "And that understanding will guide you through whatever comes next. But remember, some will not accept lessons so quietly. The Beta's pride has been wounded, and he will not remain idle." Lyra's gaze hardened. "Then let him try. He will find that courage is not so easily defeated, and choice cannot be stolen." The throne room loomed ahead, Grand and imposing, yet it felt smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of truth and the quiet strength of the two who approached. Courtiers watched them pass, some with curiosity, some with unease, and a few with grudging respect. Lyra had claimed her place not by force or fear, but by strength, courage, and dignity. The beta emerged from the shadows of his chambers, his expression a mask of controlled fury. His eyes, sharp and calculating, fell upon Lyra and the alpha. "So," he said finally, his voice smooth yet tense, "you return. I see that the duel did not teach humility, only defiance." Lyra did not flinch. "The duel taught me clarity, courage, and choice. It taught me that no one's pride should define my path, and that strength is found not in fear but in action guided by truth." The beta's jaw tightened. He had expected anger, submission, or perhaps fear, but Lyra's calm certainty was a force he could not anticipate. He had misjudged her, underestimated her, and in that miscalculation lay the ruin of his carefully constructed dominance. The alpha stepped forward, silent but commanding. His presence alone shifted the energy in the room. The beta's allies faltered under his gaze, the weight of his authority undeniable. "This ends now," the alpha said, voice calm and clear. "No more challenges, no more schemes. The duel revealed what needed to be seen, and the choice has been made." The beta's lips pressed into a thin line, his pride resisting, yet the truth could not be ignored. He had been tested, exposed, and humbled in a way he had never anticipated. The duel had been more than a test of skill. It had been a reflection of character, courage, and choice, and in that mirror, he had seen his flaws laid bare. Lyra stepped closer, her gaze steady and unwavering. "You have a choice, as we all do," she said softly, yet with authority. "You can continue down the path of pride and cruelty, or you can acknowledge what has been revealed and move forward with understanding. It is not weakness to choose wisely. It is strength." The beta's eyes flickered, a storm of emotions passing across his face. Pride, anger, frustration, and perhaps the faintest hint of realization. He had sought to control, to humiliate, and to dominate, yet he had faced courage, clarity, and the unshakable bond between Lyra and the alpha. And for the first time, he understood that control taken by fear was fragile, fleeting, and meaningless against true strength. He did not speak for a long moment. The room remained silent, the courtiers holding their breath, waiting for the resolution that would shape the future of the court. Finally, the beta lowered his gaze. A subtle gesture of acknowledgement, and the tension that had gripped the castle began to ease. Lyra felt a quiet relief settle within her. The duel had tested more than physical skill. It had tested character, courage, and heart. The beta had been confronted with his own limitations, and while pride would always linger, the truth had been revealed. She had faced rejection, humiliation, and cruelty, and had emerged not only unbroken but stronger, wiser, and more certain of her own power. The alpha placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, a subtle gesture of solidarity and recognition. "You have done more than face a challenge," he said softly. "You have claimed your place, your voice, and your strength. That is a victory greater than any duel could provide." Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle within her. "I understand now. Strength is not measured by fear or dominance, but by courage, choice, and clarity, and by standing true to oneself." The beta's lips pressed into a line, but he said nothing. His pride had been wounded. Yet in the quiet aftermath, there was a recognition that actions, character, and courage held power beyond arrogance or fear. The duel had changed more than the court. It had revealed truths about strength, respect, and the value of choice. The courtiers began to breathe more freely, murmuring among themselves. The tension that had gripped the castle for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of balance restored, and respect earned. Lyra's courage, the alpha's guidance, and the quiet force of truth had reshaped the court, not with fear, but with understanding. Lyra turned to the alpha, a faint smile touching her lips. "We did not fight for victory over him alone," she said. "We fought for clarity, courage, and choice, and we have won something far greater than dominance or pride." The alpha nodded, his gaze steady and approving. "Indeed, what we have won is not conquest but understanding. Not fear but respect, and that is far more enduring than any fleeting victory." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the castle corridors. The duel, the tension, and the confrontation had ended, yet its lessons would resonate for years to come. Lyra had faced rejection, cruelty and scorn, and had emerged with courage intact and dignity restored. She had discovered strength she had always possessed, guided by clarity, choice, and the quiet bond with the Alpha. The Beta retreated, his pride intact but tempered by recognition. He would rebuild, reassess, and perhaps, in time, understand the lessons he had been forced to confront. But for now, the court had witnessed the triumph of courage over arrogance, of clarity over intimidation, and of choice over cruelty. Lyra stood beside the Alpha, the fading light of the sun bathing them in gold. The forest beyond the castle shimmered in the evening haze, a reminder that strength, courage, and choice existed not just within the walls of the court, but in the wider world. She had faced fear, rejection, and challenge, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and unafraid. The Alpha placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of their journey together. "Whatever comes next," he said softly, "remember this strength. It will guide you, protect you, and shape the path ahead. You have claimed more than victory. You have claimed yourself." Lyra looked toward the horizon, the first stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. "I understand," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I have faced fear, found courage, and embraced choice, and I will continue to do so, no matter what challenges the future holds." The castle seemed to exhale, the tension of the day finally giving way to calm. Courtiers whispered quietly. The Beta retreated to ponder his own pride, and the Alpha and Lyra walked together through the corridors, their bond strengthened by courage, respect, and understanding. For Lyra, the day had been a revelation. She had been rejected, mocked, and scorned, yet she had faced all with courage and clarity. She had discovered that true strength lay not in domination or intimidation, but in choice, understanding, and the courage to stand unbroken. The Alpha and Lyra paused at the edge of the castle walls, looking out over the forest, the streams, and the distant mountains. The world was vast, filled with challenges, beauty, and possibility. And now, Lyra knew that whatever came, she would face it with courage, clarity, and choice by her side, and with the Alpha as her equal, her ally and her friend. The night descended slowly, silver light spilling over the castle and the forest below. Lyra felt the quiet hum of life, of strength, and of destiny settling within her. She had faced rejection, cruelty, and challenge, and she had emerged whole, unbroken, and ready for whatever the world had yet to reveal. Ending, the Beta had been humbled, the duel resolved, and the court changed forever. Lyra had reclaimed her strength, her voice, and her courage, standing as a force of clarity and choice. And with the Alpha by her side, she faced the future not with fear but with certainty, knowing that true strength was measured not by dominance, but by courage, understanding, and the bonds we choose to honor.